Israeli airstrikes and shelling have continued across the Gaza Strip. In the north, Israel targeted residential blocks in Jabalia, Gaza City, and Beit Lahia. On Friday, Israel murdered the daughter, grandson, and son-in-law of Rifat al-Hariri, the beloved writer, poet, educator, and our de facto Gaza editor, who was assassinated by Israel in December. Our colleague Ali Abunimah writes that, quote, the airstrike on a building in the Al Rimal neighborhood of Gaza City killed Shaima Rifat al-Hariri, her husband Mohammed Abdelaziz Siam, and their 3-month-old son Abdulrahman. They had been sheltering in the building of Global Communities, an international relief charity formerly known as CHF in Gaza City, according to Mohammed's brother. The killing of Rifat's daughter Shaima and the grandson he never had a chance to meet is being received with renewed outrage and grief from Rifat's close friends, former students, and people all around the world who have been touched by Rifat's life and work. In an interview with Al Jazeera some years ago, Rifat described how Shaima, then just 5 years old, inspired him to start telling stories during Israel's first major war on Gaza in December 2008 to January 2009. Shaima was a talented calligrapher who cherished her father's memory and what he meant to people all over the world. For more, read both Ali Abunimah's post and our contributor Hen Ghazi Al-Farah's article, Rifat al-Hariri was special, so was his daughter, on electronicintifada.net. In central Gaza over the last few days, Israeli forces have continued to strike Deir Balah and Nuseirat refugee camp. Our contributor Abu Bakr Abed took this photo of Deir Balah on Tuesday, saying that an Israeli jet bombed a home very close to his house. He added that amongst the casualties was one child. And just in the last few minutes, Abu Bakr sent us this update. The Al-Zuwaida area north of Deir Balah is being repeatedly targeted as a huge, terrifying missile has just now hit a residential building. Warplanes continue to closely hover above the area. Drones are continuing to buzz. Ambulances' sirens, the normal tone in Gaza, are back again for casualties, he said. Israel also continued to target areas in and around the southern city of Rafah relentlessly, as Israeli officials ramp up threats of a ground invasion. Dozens of Palestinians in Rafah have been killed over the past few days in multiple bombings of apartment blocks and homes. On Tuesday, Israel struck tents of displaced people in Rafah with incendiary weapons. Meanwhile, Israel is reportedly setting up a complex system of checkpoints that will prevent men, quote, of military age from fleeing Rafah in preparation for its offensive on the southern Gaza border city, according to a report published on Tuesday in Middle East Eye, citing an unnamed senior Western official. According to the report, quote, the checkpoints are designed to allow some women and children to leave Rafah ahead of an expected Israeli offensive, but unarmed civilian Palestinian men will likely be separated from their families and remain trapped in Rafah during the assault. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced on Tuesday that the Israeli army will move ahead with a ground invasion into Rafah, quote, whether or not there is a ceasefire deal that would include a prisoner swap. The extremist National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who had reportedly warned Netanyahu that if the Rafah invasion did not happen, it would mean the dissolution of the prime minister's government, said on Tuesday that he was pleased with Netanyahu's statement and said he had, quote, warned the prime minister of the consequences if, God forbid, Israel does not enter Rafah. If, God forbid, we end the war. If, God forbid, there will be a reckless deal. The prime minister heard my words, Itamar Ben-Gvir said, promised that Israel would go into Rafah, promised that the war would not end, and promised that there would be no reckless deal. I welcome these things. I think the prime minister understands very well what it will mean if these things do not take place, he added. Ben-Gvir's colleague, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, called for the, quote, total annihilation of Gaza on Tuesday, adding that Israel's war cabinet should not agree to any political concessions in any ceasefire negotiation. Addressing Netanyahu, Smotrich said, quote, "Don't wave a white flag. Don't let Yahya Sinwar humiliate us again and win the war. A government that submits to international pressure and stops the war in the middle will, at that moment, lose its right to exist." Palestinian human rights organizations have stated that an attack on Rafah, which is where half the population of the Gaza Strip has already fled, would be catastrophic. Al-Haq, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, and Al-Mizan stated last week that, quote, "Our organizations warn of the threat of an Israeli ground invasion on Rafah. Such an attack would represent the peak of the Israeli attack on Gaza, with the intent of inflicting the highest number of casualties and civilian victims, potentially leading to mass forcible displacement toward the Egyptian borders, located mere meters away. This scenario threatens the acceleration of the Nakba on the Palestinian people and is an approaching reality." The United Nations stated that across Gaza, there are more than 37 million tons of debris and rubble, and that much of it also contains unexploded ordnance. The United Nations Mine Action Service reported that it could take up to 14 years to clear all the explosive threats once the war is over. And according to the Palestinian Civil Defense in Gaza, an estimated 10,000 bodies are decomposing under the rubble. In a press release published on Tuesday, Gaza's civil defense warned that the decomposing bodies will likely increase the threat of diseases, especially as the summer temperatures rise. Pressure on international agencies such as the UN is needed, the civil defense added, to, quote, "allow the entry of heavy equipment necessary to enable our crews to save the lives of those wounded by the ongoing Israeli bombing, as well as to extract the bodies of the martyrs that are decomposing under the rubble and are causing a health disaster for the population." The U.S. military began construction of a pier off the coast of northern Gaza this week in coordination with the Israelis and USAID, the State Department's development agency. 1,000 U.S. soldiers and sailors will be involved in the pier project, military officials said. Meanwhile, Israel refuses to allow thousands of aid trucks to enter and distribute food, medicine, and supplies inside Gaza through the various land routes. John Elmer, of course, will have much more on this story later on in the program. In the occupied West Bank, hundreds of students at Birzeit University near Ramallah expelled the German ambassador to the Palestinian Authority on Tuesday and forced him to leave the campus. The ambassador was visiting the on-campus Palestine Museum to attend a conference with international representatives, but learning of his presence and as Germany remains a major supporter of Israel's genocide in Gaza, students kicked him out. Germany remains the second largest exporter of weapons to Israel behind the U.S. Also on Tuesday in Ramallah, protesters held a demonstration outside of the office of Canada's representative to the Palestinian Authority over Canada's role in supporting Israel's genocide. Palestinian Authority security services and police shoved and beat protesters. Here's a clip of that demonstration, with protesters chanting, "Oh, Palestinian Authority, what's wrong with you? I don't know what happened to you. You're arresting those with honor while the spies are in your midst." Defense for Children International Palestine reported this week that Israeli forces are holding 61 Palestinian children in administrative detention. The rights group states that, quote, "This is a record number since DCIP began monitoring child administrative detainees in 2008. At least half of these children were detained after October 7th, as Israeli forces escalated military operations throughout the West Bank." Ayed Abu Aktesh, Accountability Program Director at Defense for Children International Palestine, stated, quote, "Since October 7th, Israeli forces have accelerated their arrest campaigns against Palestinian children and detained a record number of children without charge. The rights group says that about 1 in 3 Palestinian child detainees are held under administrative detention orders, according to the Israel Prison Service. At the end of March, Israeli forces were detaining 194 Palestinian children. The rise in the number of Palestinian children subjected to administrative detention coincides with the alarming conditions faced by Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons, Defense for Children International Palestine adds. The situation of Palestinian prisoners has become increasingly worse, with children reporting very harsh conditions since October 7th. Administrative detention is a form of imprisonment without charge or trial, regularly used by Israeli authorities to detain Palestinians, including children. Palestinian children held under administrative detention orders are not presented with charges, and their detention is based on secret evidence that is neither disclosed to the child nor their attorney, preventing them from preparing a legal challenge to the detention and its alleged basis, according to documentation collected by Defense for Children International Palestine. Our colleague Maureen Murphy reports that, quote, Israel's decades of impunity are over, or so its leaders fear, and are leaking reports to the media that war crimes arrest warrants are imminent in an effort to get its allies to thwart them. Maureen writes that those leaked rumors that members of Israel's war cabinet, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and the military chief 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 will soon be indicted at the International Criminal Court may very well be credible. Reuters reported on Monday that staff at Gaza hospitals, which over the past several months have been stripped of their ability to provide care and transformed into mass graves, were interviewed by International Criminal Court investigators. It is possible that arrest warrants against senior Israeli officials have already been issued in confidentiality, Maureen writes. She adds that, quote, informing Israel's panic over the ICC is the fact that it can only maintain its regime of settler colonization, apartheid, and occupation in Palestine with the support of the world's sole superpower. But that support is eroding due to widespread disgust toward Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. Decades of bipartisan support for Israel is viewed by many as a strategic liability from which the U.S. gains little benefit, increasingly so as a desperate Netanyahu attempts to drag Washington into a catastrophic regional war. The Biden administration's hands-on role in Israel's genocide in Gaza is a legal liability as well. ICC arrest warrants for Israeli war crimes could and should implicate U.S. officials, Maureen writes. For much more, read Maureen Claire Murphy's report, U.S. Implicated as Israeli Impunity Nears Its End, on electronicintifada.net. In another development at The Hague, the World Court on Tuesday ruled against issuing provisional measures against Germany over charges brought by Nicaragua that Germany's arms sales are aiding and abetting Israel's genocide in Gaza. In a post published earlier today, Maureen Claire Murphy writes that though the World Court declined to issue the emergency measures, it did not dismiss Nicaragua's case against Germany. The court reminded states of their obligations in relation to the transfer of arms, where there is a risk that weapons might be used to violate international law. The judges stated that, quote, all these obligations are incumbent upon Germany as a state party in its supply of arms to Israel. For much more, read Maureen Claire Murphy's post, World Court Rejects Ban on German Weapons Exports to Israel, on electronicintifada.net. On Tuesday, Code Pink's Medea Benjamin disrupted Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin during a House meeting. She said, quote, I couldn't just listen to him talk about U.S. leadership while the whole world is watching U.S. complicity in the genocide occurring in Gaza. Here is that video.
For our partners in Congress who help.
How can you talk about U.S. leadership when we're supporting genocide in Gaza?
Committee will come to order.
It is illegal, it is immoral, it is disgusting. The whole world is watching what we are doing in Gaza right now. Secretary General, you are supporting a genocide. Stop supporting genocide. Free Palestine. So I spoke out at the hearing where General Austin was talking about U.S. leadership. And I said, how can you talk about U.S. leadership when the U.S. is supporting genocide and the whole world is watching as the U.S. is sending weapons that violate U.S. laws, violate international laws, violate world opinion, violate basic decency and morality. We have to speak out. And I'm wearing a t-shirt that says, another Jew that speaks out against genocide.
You need to stay back and not interfere with it.
Going to search her again?
She will be searched again before she gets in the way.
What is in there? What is a harm to everyone? Are all these Congress people who just voted for $70 billion more for going to Israel? Every one of them had blood on their hands. Those are the ones that should be arrested. I am proud to have stood up. We are all doing what we can. We must stop our government, even if it means going to jail for justice.
You're arresting the wrong person.
Hey, ma'am.
That was Medea Benjamin of Code Pink being arrested after disrupting Lloyd Austin's address to the House. And finally, last night in New York City, throngs of police, including riot cops in a SWAT truck, stormed the campus of Columbia University and began violently arresting student protesters who have been holding an encampment for 2 weeks to demand that the university divest from companies that profit from Israel's genocide. Cops also violently arrested and beat students at the nearby City College of New York. More than 100 campuses around the country have begun their own encampments to demand an end to their university's complicity in Israel's crimes. On Monday night, Columbia students took over Hamilton Hall, which they renamed after Hind Rajab, the 6-year-old girl who was killed by Israeli soldiers at the end of January in Gaza City. Hind was the sole survivor of a massacre of her family, who were all killed in their car as they attempted to evacuate their neighborhood. But nearly 2 weeks later, the little girl's body was found alongside those of her relatives in the car, as well as the bodies of the 2 paramedics who were found in the ambulance that had come to her assistance. Journalist Lama El-Arian filmed NYPD breaking into the Hind Hall building last night and forcing protesters out to be arrested. Reporter Talia Jane filmed the NYPD making arrests at the gates of Columbia University, quote, as students, faculty, and staff attempted to protect the university. NYPD is using floodlights on the campus, hindering visibility, Talia Jane tweeted.
You will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct. You are unlawfully obstructing pedestrian traffic. You are ordered to disperse now to commit the same form of pedestrian traffic. If you do so voluntarily, no charges will be placed against you. If you refuse to disperse, you will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly.
That was from reporter Talia Jane. This morning, Columbia Students for Justice in Palestine stated that multiple students were taken straight to the hospital due to severe injuries by NYPD, and students had swollen faces from being kicked repeatedly by police. The Columbia University student-run radio station, WKCR, reported that the administration asked the New York Police Department not just to come and violently arrest the students, but also to remain on campus until mid-May, which is after graduation. At UCLA, overnight, student activists say that police, not surprisingly, stood by as a pro-genocide lynch mob attacked the student encampment, assaulted students, set off fireworks, and sprayed mace into students' tents. We'll continue reporting on the situation at Columbia, at UCLA, and on campuses across the US and around the world as students, activists, and communities rise up against this genocide and fight state repression that is designed to silence these uprisings. And you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.